at Santa Rosa Community College. Our presenters for this are Leela Rand, who started at Santa Rosa Junior College in 2015 as a part-time employee in the area of IT. She is the web developer and main point of contact for the campus's website and online accessibility. We also have Corinne Halvarin, and I think I messed up your last name, Corinne, I'm sorry, who started working in distance ed as a web designer back in 2000. In 2009, she took on the class of accessibility compliance reviews of online materials. She has a BA in fine arts and left teaching in 2015 to be a full-time assistive technology specialist. And with that, I'll turn it over to Leela and Corinne.
All right, I will share my screen. And oops, I'm not ready, sorry. Get this going. Here we go. There we go. So hopefully you see that presentation. Oops, I'm on the wrong page, sorry. Let's start at the beginning. All right, my name's Corinne Haverden, and that's how you pronounce my name. I know it's not so easy, it's Finnish. And I work as an instructional accessibility specialist at Santa Rosa Junior College. We're working in the distance education department. And co-presenting with me today is Leela Rand, who has been the IT coordinator of online accessibility, although she recently got a promotion, but she's been very instrumental in the web accessibility efforts at our school. And I'm going to talk to you, I'm going to start with the early days, which is my side of the pond, which is academic accessibility. Back in the day, we had a dean over liberal arts and sciences who at that point had a purview over distance education. And she started seeing all these lawsuits in education, and it sparked her interest and concern. And she went and visited the college attorney and consulted with him. And he sort of reinforced what she was feeling. He said, yes, you're right to be concerned about the risk and responsibilities of not addressing this work. And so that's all she needed. She decided to move forward and put together an academic accessibility policy. And around this time, you know, there was just the start of this growing interest in the colleges to accessibility of online materials, online instructional materials, and web accessibility. And the Dear Colleague letter that came out in 2010 sort of really supported this, reinforced it as well. That was a letter that came out from the US Department of the Office of Civil Rights and the DOJ, and it went to all the university presidents. And it was about the accessibility of emerging technologies in educational settings. So that's kind of the fabric of the time. So this dean created this accessibility policy. It was only for academic accessibility. And she came up with this idea of a mandatory 6-year cycle of review for all online and hybrid courses. So she made a spreadsheet. She had her admin make a spreadsheet and put all the online and hybrid courses in there and split it up into 6 different parts. I don't know how she came up with 6 years, but it actually worked out pretty good because it was the right amount of courses to take on every year that I ended up doing. But then also all new online and hybrid courses would be required to be reviewed too. Now, in order to get this passed, and of course this had to go through faculty negotiations as well, the policy had to strongly state that the district will provide support to faculty for this accessibility compliance work. And so my position was born, the position I eventually got. They initially called it PC trainer. They didn't know what to call it. They were just looking for something else out there that was already a job description to hang their hat on. They made it a 30% classified position. And as I was applying for it, they actually tried to downgrade it to 20%, but luckily that didn't happen. And then I got the position, and I was tasked with meeting with faculty one-on-one to review their online and hybrid courses, provide training, and help them make the fixes that they were needed to make. Now, I was supposed to just tell them how to do it, but quickly I saw how complex that was. And I really wanted to help them more and do the work, but it was really hard at 30%. An interesting aside to this position was in the process of it being created, there was actually kind of an argument or a pushback from one side to another between various factions. There was instructional computing and distance education on one side, pushing back at disability resources departments, what we call DSPS at our school. They thought they had all the money and disability resources department should take care of this work. And disability resources department said, no, that's a separate thing. We do accommodation, that's a separate bucket. And they were actually right. And so it got pushed back to our side. It ended up in my lap. I actually started this work as a contract position before they got the classified position in place. And I think it ended up in the right department, even though DE was just a department of one programmer working under a dean. And me, I worked part-time at that time, making graphics for instructors, putting their work online. And so I played in Photoshop all day. It was great fun, but I knew that work was probably not going to stick around. So I was very happy to get that work. And I think the skills that I had were really lent itself to the position because I actually had taught web design at the college and I had some pretty good web skills. And it turns out that web skills are really important for understanding how to implement Section 508. So I think it happened in a fortuitous way. But then we went into this long fight to try to get this position funded so that it could really be effective. Like I said, it was initially called the PC trainer, and then with the backing of a dean, that we kept getting passed from dean to dean, distance education. I got the help of a dean to get a new classification created. First, it became assistive technology specialist, which we already had that job description, but it didn't really quite fit. And finally, we did get a new job description created called instructional accessibility specialist, which is really what needed to happen. And so, like I said, I was stuck at 30% for years. And then there was a faculty negotiation on workload issues. And one of the workload issues was this accessibility work. And due to that efforts, it got increased to 65%. So then it was almost really effective position. But eventually, the real fortuitous thing that happened is the dean that we were under learning resources and educational technology at that point, which is the library. That dean left for a VP position. And then they brought back as interim the dean that had been in that position for years. And he was very politically savvy, and he just didn't care what anybody thought because he was about to retire. And so he pushed and pushed, and he got the job up to 100%. The other important work that happened was District Accessibility Committee work. Now I'm going to call this DAC from now on. This is the District Accessibility Committee. So I got on the committee and I started going to the meetings, and it was all about physical infrastructure, doorknobs and truncated domes and signage and paths of travel. And I knew next to nothing about that. So I was a little bit shy, but eventually I found my voice and I started talking about web accessibility issues. And I had attended a webinar about a college that had studied other colleges that had gotten sued, and what did they have to do in the resolution of those lawsuits. And one of the things they had to do was create an ADA website. I'm getting the message that I'm unstable. I hope I'm going to be okay with my internet connection. Maybe what I'll do is I'll turn off my, I don't know how I do that up here. Turn off my video. I'm going to stop my video. Okay. One of the things I did was create the ADA website. So I brought that to the DAC committee, and they were really receptive. It was really great. They were really supportive, and with their help, I'm sorry, made that slide go by too fast. With their help, they helped me get this ADA website up, which was, I think, important. So the other thing going on was IT, was in charge of our website. And at that point, it was really one full-time person under, a manager, and then maybe a part-time person or two. And they really didn't have time to address accessibility as they needed, but they were trying. And they came up with this branded message out to all the people working on the mini subsites, because our website is a lot of subdomains maintained by different staff, mostly admin assistants, but some faculty, some other administrators. They're all sort of managing these little subsites. And so they came up, and I think it was smart that they branded it as Zero Defects. And it's just the ability to get the word out and let people know we've got to have an attention to accessibility. And around that time, they also purchased Site Improve, which is a web accessibility testing tool. And through that tool, they figured out they had over 2,000 inaccessible documents on our website, which was kind of scary. So IT came and presented the status of the accessibility of our website to this DAC committee. And the VP over HR was also the DAC co-chair, and she got very interested and very alarmed because a lot of those inaccessible documents that were very important were on the HR site. And so pretty quickly, we were able to create sort of a contract, short-term non-continuing is what we call it, position at 50%, working 20 hours a week to start to address this web accessibility work. And Leela applied for that job and got it. And we recognized that we needed to hire some students to do the grunt work, because it's going to be a lot of grunt work to do this. And they were initially managed by a DRD specialist. And that was fortuitous because this person, who I think is in the audience, became a key player in all the efforts that we've made here in bridging what's going on at DRD and understanding the accessibility experience for the students. The DAC committee continued to work on this, and we knew that we didn't want this to be a part-time, short-term, non-continuing position. We needed it to be a 100% full-time position. And in my mind, you heard what I just said about the 30% job I had for years. I was kind of really skeptical that this would happen, but we formed a subcommittee to try and create this permanent position. And you can see the makeup of the subcommittee, including myself, the last one listed there. We started forming these presentations, and the DRD director presented to cabinet, which is our VPs who meet regularly. I think she made 2 presentations. And I was just really shocked because it happened. The tipping point came when the president of the college accepted that this work had to be funded. And I'll never forget it because the VP over finance sent out an email to the whole college. We were really in a bad place financially. We were contracting, so it was a big ask to get money to do this. And this VP over finance sent out this email saying, well, we're going to have to contract here. We're going to have to cut so much money here. And oh, by the way, we have to pay for this accessibility work. And I was in my office and I just howled. It's like, wow, things are happening. So this was very exciting. So Leela got the position. Oops, I think I went backwards. Leela got the position. Leela, who will be speaking in a few minutes, of being the IT person over accessibility. Now the 2 student workers went under her. They were working on all these PDFs, particularly the HR ones they started with. She started doing trainings for classified, the people working on these web sites. And lo and behold, the faculty started showing up, which was a surprise to me because I've been doing trainings for years for faculty and was having a hard time having them show up because it wasn't mandatory, right? But they started showing up because, the accessibility word was getting out slowly more and more. And so then Leela and I started collaborating on these trainings, and we started talking regularly. I mean, it was just so great to not be the one, web accessibility person on campus. Now I had another, and we talked regularly, and our collaboration, I think, has been really key, I think. I mean, for me, it felt that way. And then another fortuitous thing happened. DRD alerted us about a blind student who was willing to work with us, testing materials with screen readers, understanding. She would go and sit once a week with Leela in IT, and they would look at materials, and then she'd come once a week to my office in DE, and we'd look at materials. And it really helped us understand the experience of a blind person using a screen reader, and what's the most important thing to be working on, and what are the things that aren't really working so well. So that was really helpful. One thing I wanted to also say that was interesting: when my position was created, I got very little oversight and very little training. I had to learn it a lot on my own. I really felt like a silo, not just at my college, but in the greater realm of things. And I can't say enough how these workshops that the CCC accessibility people put on are important. It's just so great to be able to talk about this stuff with everybody. So I just wanted to put that in there. And now I'm going to hand off to Leela, who's going to talk about the next step, which was really addressing deeper accessibility issues, web accessibility issues at the college, which involved needing a policy. So take it away, Leela.
Okay. Am I here?
I hear you.
Okay. Well, I'm here. Hi, I'm Leela. And yes, Corinne did a great job of kind of talking about the many, many fortuitous things that happened to bring us to the point where I got hired full-time. And as she mentioned, I had been doing a lot of trainings. Most of what I was doing was remediating documents on the website, or overseeing students who were remediating documents, and working with the site admins to get accessibility issues on their subdomains fixed. But it became clear to me that although that was really important work, and definitely there was an increased awareness of accessibility across campus because of that, it wasn't dealing with the big issues like the software that was getting purchased on a daily basis that was not accessible, and of course also on the instructional side of the pond, also a lot of software that wasn't accessible, and that we really needed a policy to give us a little bit of teeth to be able to implement some kind of structural changes to how we approach accessibility. And I had gone to at least a couple at that point of the CCC accessibility conferences, and at that time there was a lot of emphasis on policy, on crafting an accessibility policy, and a lot of examples given on the website, and talked about at the conferences what kinds of what was a good policy, what sort of elements are included in a good policy. And so, being brand new and not really knowing what I was doing, we decided that I would try to get an accessibility policy passed through our college council. So I scoured the policies that the CCC put out as examples, scoured other policies, scoured the language in the ADA and other, other laws, and came up with a draft, which I just wrote in everything that I thought was good, basically. And then I took it to the DAC committee, the District Access Committee, to request their sponsorship and mentoring in getting the proposed policy into decent shape, and then taking it on to the college council. So there was receptivity there. We had a little subcommittee of people who worked on it. And over the course of a couple of months or so, we came up with something that got approved by the committee, and then we were ready to take it to the college council. Corrine. So took it to the college council and presented it there, and the VP, who co-chair of the college council, said, "You were very brave to bring this here, and it's good, but it doesn't sound like our language at all, and it really needs some work language-wise to get it in line with the rest of our policy." And she tasked her co-chair to be my mentor in crafting a policy that would make it through the college council. And that was just an enormous boon for me. She was a longtime faculty librarian, very politically savvy, had been involved with college council for a very long time, knew the ins and outs in a way that I didn't at all. And she was willing to work with me, and did work with me very closely over months of rewriting language, doing research, late nights. And finally, through all that work, college council said that it was ready to be shared with the various stakeholders. Corrine. So I just wanted to show this. This is a document. I'd actually created it before I even brought it to, brought the draft policy to the DAC committee, and then I used it again when I brought it to college council, and it kept changing during that time as I got further in the process. The language changed, but this was sort of my why we need this document. And I found it very helpful as a way to sort of let people know why, liability, it's the right thing to do for our students. And we have no real heft in our existing policy. The policies that we had at the time, Corrine talked a little bit about the one for web-based instructional materials. It only applied, however, to web-based instructional materials, not to our website, third-party non-instructional applications, et cetera. And then we did have a tiny little mention in the IT portion of our policies, saying all electronic communications intended to accomplish the academic and administrative tasks of the district shall be accessible to authorized users with disabilities. And that was it. And there was nothing that was all-encompassing that really covered ICT for every constituency. And that was really what we were going for, was an kind of all-inclusive policy that lives in one place that touches on everything. And so this document sort of laid the groundwork for that. Corrine. So at College Council, these are the stakeholder groups that are involved. Each one has one or more representatives there. And they were all asked if they wanted me and whoever else was working with me at the time to make a presentation so that they could vote on whether to approve the draft policy we'd come up with. And every single one of these groups said yes, they wanted a presentation. So this process then became a shopping around of the proposed policy to all of these different groups. And again, being naive and new and not knowing what I was doing, I scheduled a lot of the presentations very close to each other. So some weeks I had 2 or 3 presentations. And after I did that, my mentor, who had just been so hugely helpful, said, "Why did you do that? Now you're not going to have enough time in between them to change the language or to make the changes needed based on what happened at the last one, and I sort of said, oh, well, I'll do my best. But it actually turned out to be a good thing because we got through all of these people, all of these stakeholders in record time. I would say over probably 2 months, we did almost every single one of these presentations to all of these different groups. Some of them, you know, were really easy, and like the classified Senate and the HR, of course, the HR head was on DAC, so she was, and actually she had given me some mentorship as well. We were a little worried about the faculty union and the academic senate. And actually, sometimes I would do these presentations on my own. A lot of times my mentor would come with me. But when we went to academic senate and the faculty union, we had the full group. Corinne was there, my mentor was there, DE, other people from DE were there, and DRD. And we got through all of them somehow in a relatively painless way, with, of course, a lot more revisions, additions, and subtractions from what we'd done. Corinne. So this is just a visual of the policy as it went through the stakeholder groups. You can see the colored text is additions, the strike throughs are what's taken out. If you could go to the next slide. So a lot of changes, a lot of work, and a lot of wordsmithing. There was a lot of attention paid to very small nuances between different words and ideas. If you could go forward, Corinne. In terms of what the pressure points were, like I said, I was pretty concerned about the faculty union and the academic senate, but they're both very powerful on our campus. And I was afraid that it would get watered down there, but that didn't happen, surprisingly. The closest thing to a pressure point we had was some difficulty between DRD and DE, which was really more historical, I think, a little bit of a frosty relationship from the past, and concern about difficult to make accessible courses, basically, whether it was on DRD to just provide accommodations or whether it was on DE to make everything accessible out of the box. And there was a lot of back and forth about that, a lot of questions. Luckily, there were new personalities in both departments. And finally, we created a meeting with DRD and DE and IT, which is me, basically, and really hashed out a lot of stuff. And, you know, it's still in process. The questions have not been answered fully. There's going to be questions about this line between accessibility and distance education. DE is distance education. You know, forever probably. Things get squirrely when you're talking about course accessibility. But the real—
I would just interject here too. Remember, we have a mandatory cycle of review, and it sort of pushes us in this realm, like, who do I pass? Who do I give an official pass? And who doesn't get it? And then is that going to affect their evaluation, as instructors worry about, although it never really does. But that's one of the things that sort of at our college is sort of making this pressure point too. I was just going to interject that. Yeah.
Yeah, right. That's right. But all of this, through this meeting and the process of kind of hashing things out, it led to a deeper collaboration between the three of us, the three groups, IT, DRD, and distance ed, that has really thrived and strengthened since that time. And we're going to go over that in a little bit. Corinne. So the key language that we have in the accessibility policy, which did get approved, finally got approved, and is the law of the land right now, although we will be moving now, adopting the CCLC policies. And we're not going to be touching the accessibility one yet, but at some point we will be, and I intend to be involved in that, make sure that the language doesn't get too watered down. But the basics of it is that, whose responsibility? And as we saw in our last presentation before this on the ADA, it's everybody's responsibility. We say all district employees who are responsible for information and communication technology produced, maintained, distributed, purchased, and or used by the SRJC community are required to ensure that accessibility standards for individuals with disabilities are met. And we say that anybody who seeks to purchase or utilize new ICT must ensure that the product is accessible in consultation with the coordinator of online accessibility before purchasing or acquiring it, and so on. It's very much in line with law, and it's very clear that the content creators and the programmers who create it and the purchasers, everybody who touches something that goes online must be aware of and contribute to its accessibility. Corrine. So since so it's been more than 2 years, or maybe 2 years, since the accessibility policy passed. And what's different? Well, one of the big reasons we did the policy was to address purchasing. And so quite quickly after it had passed, I was added into the approval process for our software purchases. However, that I can't actually not approve any purchases. I can make it a little more painful for the requisitioner. I can make it a little more painful for the vendor. I can, try to lean on people to do more. I do get a voluntary product accessibility template, a VPAT, for almost every piece of software, but often those are not reliable. They certainly are not maintained very well. I was very optimistic about getting strong language in our contracts, and that's been hit or miss. Sometimes it happens, sometimes it doesn't. So there's still a lot to be done in purchasing. We also have, people who purchase through grants or on their credit card. Those don't come through the normal channels, so I don't even see those. Of course, there's free things that people get. So there's a lot still to be done, but we are in the process of working on that. And I will say that even just the process of asking requisitioners to get VPATs is also increasing the awareness of accessibility. And I try to use that ask as a way to talk about, if it's student facing and they, if they can't even tab through it, then it's useless and you're going to need to provide accommodation for them, or, whatever. So, there's still definitely a good side to everything, even when it's not perfect. So yes, more needs to happen globally on the purchasing and on all ends. We still have a lot to do. Our resources, like everyone's, are dwindling post-COVID, where we had the fires a couple of years ago, and then, or 3 or so years ago, and now COVID, and so our school is in a challenging place and money is tight and it's hard to ask for everything that we want. And then, like I mentioned before, we do have a campus culture that where the faculty union is very powerful, and it can be hard to make changes and it can be hard to get things done. But we're in a very positive place nonetheless, I would say. Green.
Yeah. Did you want me to talk on
Yeah.
this one? Yeah. So uh, the theme of this, as I'm going through and remembering everything and writing things down, to me, the strongest thing I feel is the silos breaking down. Because remember, I described I was kind of one person in an office without much oversight or interaction, particularly with DRD, and that's really changed a lot. But first we had Leela and I together, which was felt so much stronger having another person to bounce ideas off of and to talk about things with. There's been more interaction with DRD and DE, and as Leela described, personalities, there's some personnel change and personalities change, and we're really meshing well now. And I feel like we're collaborating really well. And I just think that's so important. The DAC committee has really helped so much. It was kind of a lightning rod where we would come together. But the real powerful thing too has been this we call it the ad hoc web accessibility work group. And as Leela described, we started coming together, her and me and the director of distance education, my boss, and the DRD director, who's also a dean. The four of us were meeting once a week before COVID. And then after COVID, we started meeting twice a week. It kind of formed out of doing the board policy, but we just kept meeting. And I think it's just been so important. And this group during COVID, it's just been a lifesaver. I mean, because we had to go into triage mode. We had to deal with how are we going to get all this captioning work done? How are we going to take care of all these students who are suddenly forced into online courses? And how can we make sure that the materials that really need to be made accessible are made accessible? And so it's just been life-saving to have this group come together. And I mentioned the DRD specialist who is part of this group, and now she gives hours to DE. We've got her working for us. And her and I meet regularly and talk about the different courses that have DRD students in it. And we share the work and figure out what is the priority work. And it really helps having a DRD specialist inputting to that, because they're in contact with the students. I'm in contact with the faculty, not the students. And so sharing the experience of the students is really, really important. And then as the COVID was happening, messaging to faculty became important, because we had the faculty, as Leela mentions, very strong. They were coming up with these, what did they call them, Leela? These letters that they would side letters that they would craft, and they'd touch on accessibility, and it would be a little out of whack. And so we were able to step in and say, oh no, this is what we need to say about this. And it's really helped. And now going forward, one of the things that's happening is we have all these instructors online, and some of them are actually thinking, well, most of them don't like it, but some of them do, and they want to continue to be online. And some departments are seeing, the wisdom in continuing to augment the online program. So we're going to have more and more courses online. And we have to continue to tell the story. We've had funding that came, a large part of it was the CARES funding. And, that's going away apparently at the end of December. So how are we going to continue to fund this work? And so we're continuing to want to talk to administrators, and this group, this ad hoc web accessibility work group, we invite people in. We had a dean come in the other day who's a really important dean. He's kind of the right-hand person of the VP over academic affairs, and a really astute person who was there wanting to hear really what we had to say and assiduously taking notes. And so we want to continue to get our message out to the administrators on what we continue to need. And so there's still work to do. Particularly in purchasing. You just heard the whole story about purchasing, a lot of stuff to still figure out. As Leela said, we have no teeth. She has no teeth in saying you can or can't use this. And we still have the Wild West where faculty and departments are out there going, oh, I'm going to use this. And then they'll come to DE and ask, oh, can you implement this LTI in our Canvas without any kind of oversight on the accessibility part? So we are working on that heavily. That's a big piece that we're working on. We were started to work on the EEAP, Equally Effective Alternate Access Plan, before COVID. We hadn't got that implemented yet, so that's something to get back to. You know, we brought up the issue of the difficult problem of accessibility of courses that are difficult to make accessible. What do we do about that? What's the plan? What's the accommodation plan? How do we make that all sort of more official so things run more smoothly in that way? And then, as I just mentioned, continuing to fund to support the increased online presence. And if you don't have anything to add there, Leela, I guess we're on to questions. I think we have about 8 more minutes or so, I think.
Yep, we've got some good stuff in the chat. Can you see it, Corinne?
Yeah.
I will have to get out of this.
Okay.
I see Nicola's question.
Okay.
If a fully conforming product cannot be found, the most conforming product must be purchased. Yes, that hasn't really been tested yet, truthfully. I mean, in my, so when the requisitioner requests a VPAT, then they submit a form to me, which in which I ask them, is this the only software you've looked at? If so, you know, why haven't you looked at any other software? If you have looked at other software, why do you choose this one? And, you know, make them sort of justify themselves. But I would certainly need more time and more teeth and more resources to really be able to do the research to say, well, this product is more accessible than that one. That's a, you know, a goal for the future. And as Corinne said, we did start working on the Equally Effective Alternate Access Plan, and didn't get very far before COVID hit, and haven't picked it back up again.
And we knew about that from going to a workshop.
Yes.
Accessibility
One
workshop.
of these.
Yes.
Yeah, right, that's right. Yes, no, we're totally taking actually it from you, Nicola.
Yeah, yeah.
And I have, in some cases, I have gone directly to the vendor and said, you know, what's your roadmap? What are you doing to fix things? And, you know, anyone who does this work knows that there's a lot of educational serving software companies are getting more and more, you know, savvy and making more effort. And then there's a lot of people who aren't. So just walking that line, basically.
I'm sorry, I used a lot of abbreviations. DE is Distance Education and DRD is Disability Resource Department. I think we're one of, I don't know any other college that calls it Disability Resource Department. It's usually DSPS, but those are kind of the two main players. So I'm sorry I didn't explain that. And VPATs, I think.
Yeah, they're voluntary product accessibility templates. They're a voluntary documentation that vendors are encouraged to create, but again, it's voluntary, to talk about how they meet the WCAG standards or don't, what elements are in compliance and which ones aren't. And sometimes there are some vendors who don't have them. More and more do seem to have them. Some of them are out of date. Some of them are self-reported by the vendor and they're useless. They don't really say anything, but sometimes they will have a third party testing outfit do it for them, like Level Access or somebody like that. And that's really great. When that happens, then you get very detailed.
Yeah, that's the perfect scenario of a vendor taking the responsibility to hire someone to do professional testing of their tool. And I think this is one of the biggest problems too that I see, is this misunderstanding about whose responsibility is it to do that. You know, and I've had it bandied at me at times, like, okay, we have this new tool and now we'll pass it off to Corrine to test it. And I'm like, you know, that's the vendor's responsibility, and I will do some testing. I have a very busy job, and I don't have the deep skills. I've done some testing. I've actually worked at another company that did that kind of work, so I have some skills in that. But really, you know, the vendor should be hiring these people to do the professional testing, and they shouldn't be relying on us to do the testing. And I think we have to educate the administrators and faculty and, you know, department chairs and deans or whatever, that the reality of that situation. If you want us to do the testing, then, you know, you've got to give us serious time and serious skills. And it would even be better if we hired somebody who had that. But really, it comes down to that's the vendor's responsibility, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, for sure. That was something Sean Keegan always hammered home. It's not your job to test the software.
I think I remember Nicholas talking about that at an earlier workshop too. It was interesting to hear what he's doing at College of the Desert there. I mean, we're just all figuring this stuff out, and each college probably is stronger in some areas and weaker in others. And I think the discussions that we've had at this level at these workshops is just so important, because we're all trying to figure something out. And I just remember when I was one person in an office and I was overwhelmed that there was nothing. And then what would happen is people would reach out to me from some other college and going, oh, I hear you're doing this work. Tell me, how do you do it? You know? And I'm in my office going like, wow, I'm behind the curtain, Mr. Wizard, trying to figure this out. And I think these discussions that we have are just so important.
Yeah.
Corrine and Lila, thank you for this. This is Lori Vasquez at Santa Barbara City College. I think the takeaway from your presentation is that you can come at this work from any position that you currently are sitting in at your campuses, but at the end of the day, it really is about a collaborative effort. But you also have to educate yourself so that when you're communicating with your colleagues and with vendors, you have some language to start with. And the goal of the accessibility BPAP that is now 3725 for our system is that the goal is to have a common language, and again, to educate yourself so that as we become more knowledgeable, we're working from the same framework.
Very well said. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah, that's great.
Good way to put it. Yeah. I was in a workshop or a webinar recently that was a small school of 2,000 students. It was a STEM school. So, you know, some schools are big, some are small, and people at the smaller schools have many hats. I mean, I was at a workshop a couple years ago for people doing the work that I do, and it was a dean there who, that was one of their hats, was the, you know, checking accessibility for online materials. But what I was going to say about this workshop or webinar that I was in, it was these two people, one who was the, I forget what they called it, was like the DSPS at their school. So she was the director, and the other was the instructional designer. And they talked about their collaboration, and it was so inspiring. You know, so it's a smaller school. So it came down to these two people, and whatever their roles were, they got together and they were doing the job of what we're talking about right now. And the collaboration was the key. And I think you were right, Lori, when you started off what you just said about collaboration as kind of the main part of our message here.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, definitely that for me, that was the takeaway, that, you know, the policy was really important and it was a great process and it did raise awareness, but implementing it is much more difficult and it's going to be a long process. But the the creating of this ad hoc accessibility work group out of that process was really valuable. I mean, that's, you know, that's the heart of it. That's really what not only is making change happen and is serving our students, but it's also just keeping us, you know, buoyant and feeling like we can do this, and, you know, that we're not alone. I mean, it's really great. Great to have a community of people that you're working with.
Wonderful. Thank you, Leela and Corinne. That was a great session. We are now